7.4. Solving rational equation. Solving rational equations is same as solving equation that containing fractions. So what we need to do is find out the LCD and multiply both sides by LCD to clear the fractions, and after that we will run into either linear or quadratic equation to solve it. But one important things or one important difference from equation that containing fractions, numerical fractions, and this type of rational equation is the rational equation has variable in the denominator, so therefore some of the value of the variable will be restricted. So we need to know the restriction so that at the end we can check our answer. So as we move on to examples, I will explain it to you why this is going to be a must. Right? So first, we take a look at on the first example, solving this rational equation. So our LCD in this case is y3, 5 together, so it will become the LCD is 15y. And now I'm going to multiply both sides of equations by this 15y to clear the fraction. So 1 over y plus 2 over 3 equal to 1 over 5. And I will multiply by the least common denominator to both sides, which is 15y times with 15y. So when I multiply it, it has to be distributed, so this 15y is going to distribute to both of the term. And now, like we did in the previously, right? So 15y times with 1 over y, that is over 1. So y and y cancels it out, so it will left with 15. So the first term, it will left with 15, and the second term, 15y over 1 times 2 over 3. So 3 goes into 1 time and 3 goes into 15 5 times. So 5 times 2 is 10y. So we got 10y equal to, on the third, on the right hand side, 1 over 5 times 15y to this over 1. So 5 goes into 1 time and 5 goes into 15 3 times. So that will become 1 times 3y is 3y. That's what we get. So from the next example, we will do the mental math, right? This is a review of writing down my side work. So now we end up in linear equation. So we will be solving linear equation, which is 15 is equal to negative 7y, and dividing both sides by negative 7, that will become 15 over negative 7. It's very important that you after you find out the LCD, you want to find out the restrictions right away. So among all the in the original rational equation, this first fraction, the denominator has a variable y. So therefore we can clearly see that the value of y cannot be 0. So that must be done right away when we find out the LCD, so that we can check the final answer that we get on solving equation right here is not this value 0. So now we can conclude that since what we solved for is not part of the restriction, so I can say that this will be my final answer. So always a good idea to get the restrictions once you get the LCD. So let's move on to the next example. So example number 2, we want to solve this equation. So when we look at the equations, the least common denominator, in this case LCD, x and x squared, so LCD will be collecting the highest exponent, so the greatest exponent, so it will be x squared. And right away I want to talk about my restriction. So for the second fractions, the denominator is x, so I know that the restriction x cannot be equal to 0. The value of x cannot be equal to 0. And the fractions on the right side of the equation is x squared, so therefore x cannot be equal to 0 either. So now we have everything's ready. We can use the technique, which is multiply the left hand side and the right hand side by least common denominator to clear the fractions. So in this case, the least common denominator is x squared, so I multiply the left hand side by x squared and the right hand side by x squared. So distributing this x squared into both of the terms on the left hand side, x squared times 1 give me x squared. X squared times 2 over x. X can cancel it out, so that will become 2x equal to, on the right hand side, x squared and x squared cancels out, so it will left with 15. So in this example, we ended up in quadratic equation. So that's why I said it in step 4, after you clear the fractions, you may end up in either a linear equations or quadratic equation. So we need to know how to solve. We need to know how to recognize and then also solve it. So solving quadratic equations, we move everything to one side equal to 0 and factor completely. So this will become x minus 5 and then x plus 3. And use zero factor property to split the two cases. And solve each case. That'll give me x equal to 5 and x equal to negative 3. And the last step, very important, you need to check, because x equal to 5, x equal to negative 3, these are possible answers. And we need to make sure these two possible answers are not in the restriction. Since both of these values are not the restriction, so I can say that I have two solutions in this example. Moving on to the next example. So to get the least common denominator for this one, I have to factor it out completely on the right hand side. So this gives us 5 over difference of 2 squared, so it will be x minus 1 and x plus 1. This allows us to see clearly what is my LCD is. So now I can say that my least common denominator will be x minus 1, x plus 1. And right away I can tell that for the first fractions on the left hand side, the denominator is x plus 1, so the value of x cannot be negative 1. And the second fractions on the right hand side, left hand side, is also 2 over x minus 1, so the value of x cannot be 1 because that's going to become 0 and undefined. And both of these negative 1 and 1 is also the restriction for the fractions on the right hand side. So now we got a least common denominator as well as the restriction. So the next step will be multiplying the left hand side by the LCD and the right hand side by LCD. To clear the fraction. So 5 over x plus 1 plus 2 over x minus 1 equal to 5 over x minus 1 and then x plus 1. So when I distribute it on the left hand side, so this x plus 1 and x minus 1 times 5 over x plus 1. So we can see that this x plus 1 and x plus 1 cancels it out. So what's left over is 5 times x minus 1 plus, when we distribute it to the second fraction, x minus 1 and x minus 1 reduced it. So what's left over is 2 times x plus 1. And on the right hand side, x minus 1 and x plus 1 both reduced it already, so I will only left with 5 times 1, which is 5. So now we're going to simplify the left-hand side, distributing 5, distributing 2, right, positive 2, and this leads to us a linear equation. So solving linear equations, that will become 7x minus 3 equal to 5, and adding 3 to both sides, and divided by 7 to both sides, I got 8 over 7. Since 8 over 7 is not the restricted value, so my final answer will be 8 over 7. So continuing, next example. So to get my least common denominator, I'm going to have to factor the denominator completely on this left-hand side equation, left-hand side of equation. So this gives us x minus 5, x minus 2, so 6 over x minus 5 minus 4 over x minus 2. And from here, we can clearly see that our least common denominator, LCD, will be x minus 5 and then x minus 2, and also the restrictions of the fractions. So the left-hand side fractions, the restriction is x cannot be equal to 5 or x cannot be equal to 2. And that also take care of the both fractions on the right-hand side. Right? So now I'm going to multiply the left-hand side by the least common denominator, and the right-hand side by the least common denominator. So x plus 13 over x minus 5 and then x minus 2. 6 over x minus 5 and 4 over x minus 2. So when I multiply on the left hand side, x minus 5 and x minus 2 cancels it out. So it will become 1 time x plus 13, which is going to be x plus 13, equal to, on the right hand side, when I distributed this x minus 5, x minus 2 to the first fraction, x minus 5 and x minus 5 cancels it out. So it left with 6 times x minus 2. And when I distribute it to the second fraction, and x minus 2 and x minus 2 cancels it out, so that will become negative minus 4 times x minus 5. Now continue simplifying this. That will give me distributing, which is 6x minus 12. Distributing negative 4 will be negative 4x plus 20. Continue solving this linear equation. That will give me 2x plus 8. Subtracting x on both sides, and then subtracting 8 on both sides. That's what we got. X is equal to 5. Since this value, 5, is one of the restricted x value, notice that? So you have to check. So therefore, this is the only possible answer, and then it is restricted. X cannot be equal to, okay, I forgot to put not equal to. So therefore, in this case, is no solution, because the only solution that we got is in the restricted part. Right? Going to the next example. So first, we're gonna factor the denominator completely. So this will become 32 over x minus 4, x plus 4, plus 5. And that helps us to see what is my least common denominator is. So LCD will be x plus 4 and then x minus 4. So right away, when we talk about the restriction, x cannot be equal to, on the fraction on the left-hand side, x cannot be equal to -4. And on the right-hand side, x cannot be equal to 4 and also -4. So I have two restricted values for x value, right? X variable x. So now we're going to multiply left-hand side and right-hand side by LCD to clear the fraction. Multiply the LCD to the left-hand side, multiply to the right-hand side the LCD. So this will become, looks like this, and when I multiply to the left-hand side, x plus 4 and x plus 4 cancels it out, so I will left with x times x minus 4. When I distribute it on the right-hand side, so x plus 4 and x minus 4 cancels it out on the first term, so it will only left with 32. And plus, when I distribute it to the second term, that will become 5 times x minus 4 and then x plus 4. Simplify a little bit, distributing x, that will become x squared minus 4x equal to 32 plus, when we multiply the difference of two square, right? X minus 4 and x plus 4, using the difference to square formula, that will become x minus 16. And now distributing this 5, that will give us 32 on the right hand side will be 32 plus 5x squared minus 5 times 16 is 80. Now we are going to be solving quadratic equations, so moving everything to the right hand side, subtracting x squared, which gives me 4x squared, adding 4x to both sides, that becomes plus 4x, and 32 minus 80, that'll give me negative 48. So now we're going to solve this quadratic equation. First factoring out the greatest common factor 4, so it'll be x squared plus 4 x squared plus x, right? X squared plus x minus 12. Continue factoring out, that will become x minus 3 and then x plus 4. Using zero factor property, I can say that x minus 3 equal to 0 and x plus 4 equal to 0. So I have x is equal to 3 and x is equal to negative 4. I have two possible answers, and now I have to check those two possible answers fall into restriction or not. Yes, restriction is negative 4 and 4, and then therefore this x minus 4 cannot be our solution. So my only solution in this case is 3. So always you need to check with your restrictions. Continuing, next example. So first we're gonna factor completely. So y over factor out the GCF 5, so it'll be y minus 2, minus factor out the greatest common factor 3, so y plus 2. And for this one, 2y squared minus 19y plus 54. So make sure you know what you're doing, right? Don't spend time to factor out the numerator, which we don't need to. So in this case, factoring out the denominator, 15y squared minus 60, the GCF is 15, so it'll be y squared minus 4. So I got this will be 15 times y minus 2, y plus 2. So now, from here, we can find out what is our LCD is. So my LCD would be 5, 3, 15. The LCD will be 15. And y minus 2, y plus 2 is part of my LCD also. So from here, I can see that my restrictions will be what? My restrictions will be y cannot be equal to 2 or -2. Now we're going to multiply the left hand side by 15 y minus 2 y plus 2, which is the LCD, and the right hand side by the LCD. So y over 5 times y minus 2 minus 5 over 3 times y plus 2 equal to 2y squared minus 19y plus 54 over 15 times y minus 2y plus 2. So when we distribute it on the left hand side to the first fraction, so I'm going to write it down for you to see it better. So 15 y minus 2y plus 2 times with y over 5 times y minus 2. So y minus 2 and y minus 2 cancels out. 5 goes into 5 one time and 15 three times. So what left over for me is 3 times y plus 2. So the first one will be 3 times y plus 2. Okay. So similarly, what we're going to do is same thing for the other fractions, right? This time we're going to do it mentally. So let's take a look at on distributing to the second fractions. When we distribute it to the second fraction, y plus 2 and y plus 2 cancels it out. 3 goes into 15 5 times. So that will give me 5 times 5 is 25. So it would be minus 25. And then y minus 2. Right? So let's check. So 15, y minus 2, y plus 2. And then times with 5 over 3 times y plus 2. So y plus 2 and y plus 2 cancels it out. 3 goes into 1 time and 3 goes into 15 5 times. So 5 times 5 is 25 times with y minus 2. So we're good. So lastly, on the right hand side, when we multiply it, the denominator cancels it out. So it will left with 2y squared minus 19y plus 54. So now we're going to continue simplify and then solve this equation. Okay. So distributing 3y, so it will be 3y squared plus 6y minus 25y plus 50. That is equal to 2y squared minus 19y plus 54. Subtracting 2y squared on both sides, that will become y squared. Adding 19y to both sides, that will become positive 25y. Oh, okay, positive 25y, and then subtracting 25y, so this will become, there's no more y term anymore, right? Because 6y, positive 6y minus 25y, that become negative 19, and then when I add 19y on both sides, that become 0. And then subtracting 54 on both sides, that become negative 4. So now when I factor it out, it will be y minus 2 and a y plus 2 equal to 0. Using zero factor property, y minus 2 is equal to 0, y plus 2 equal to 0. So therefore y is equal to 2 and a y is equal to negative 2. And going back to check our solutions, y cannot be equal to either 2 or negative 2, and that makes it no solution for this example. because both of the possible answer cannot be what? The solution, because it is part of the restriction. Good. So now, you should try this example 7. So, example 7. Similarly, we're gonna multiply by LCD to both sides. So what we want is we want to find out the least common denominator first. So factor it out first in this case. So 5 over x minus 1 x plus 3 minus 3 over x plus 2 x minus 1 equal to equal to 1 over x plus 3 x plus 2. So this time we will get the least common denominator, x minus 1, x plus 2, and then x plus 3. And also know that x cannot be equal to 1, negative 3, and negative 2. That will take care of all the fractions. So we multiply both sides of equation by LCD, which is x minus 1, x plus 2, x plus 3 to the left hand side, and then to the right hand side. So this will give us 1 over x plus 3, x plus 2, multiply the left hand side, the right hand side. So when I distribute it on the left hand side to the first fraction, x minus 1 and x plus 3 cancels it out, so it will left with 5 times x plus 2. When I distribute it to the second fraction, and x plus 2 and x minus 1 cancels it out, right? Reduce it, so it left with 3 times x plus 3 equal to, on the right hand side, when I reduce it, that will become 1 times x minus 1. So now, simplifying this, distributed 5, distributed negative 3, and distributed 1 on the right hand side. Combining like term on the left hand side, that becomes 2x plus 1 is equal to x minus 1. Subtracting x on both sides, subtracting 1 on both sides. And you can see that this negative 2 is part of the restriction, so therefore, again, this is no solution case. Okay? Now, continuing this,